History is often written by generals and politicians, but the truth of war lives in the memories of those who survived it. This is not a story from a history book. This is the voice of someone who was there. Before the war, my world was small. A house, a school, a bakery on the corner. I was 16 years old, and my biggest fear was failing my exams. We heard rumors of war, but none of us believed it would reach our street, our door. The world felt safe, predictable. We had our routines, our small joys. Summer evenings spent with friends, the smell of my mother's cooking, the sound of music from a neighbor's window. These were the things that made up my life. We listened to the news on the radio, of course. We heard the names of faraway places, of leaders making speeches, but it all felt distant, like a story from another world. War was something that happened in newspapers, not in your own backyard. It was a concept, an idea, not a reality that could touch you. How wrong we were. How naive. Then one morning, the sky roared. Planes blocked the sun. They weren't just passing over. They were like a plague of locusts, dark and menacing. The ground shook beneath my feet, and I understood something I would never forget. War does not knock, it crashes in. The first explosion was a sound I had never heard before, a deafening tear in the fabric of reality. The windows of our house shattered inward, and the air filled with dust and the smell of burning. My mother pulled me to the floor, her body shielding mine. In that moment, the boy who worried about exams was gone forever. He was replaced by someone who now understood what true fear was. The sirens that followed became the soundtrack to our new lives. They were no longer a drill or a warning, but a promise of chaos and destruction. The quiet European streets I knew were gone, replaced by rubble and fear. Food became a memory. Freedom became a rumor. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar sound in the street, sent a wave of panic through us. It could be soldiers. It could be the secret police. It could be someone informing on you for a loaf of bread. We learned to whisper, even inside our own homes. The walls themselves seemed to have ears. Across it of millions lived this same fear. Ordinary people trapped in extraordinary cruelty. Our days were dictated by ration cards and curfews. We'd stand in line for hours for a piece of stale bread or a few potatoes, if we were lucky. Hunger was a constant companion, a dull ache in the pit of your stomach that never went away. We learned to look at each other with suspicion. Could you trust your neighbor, the person you'd known your whole life? Fear those that. It isolates you, turns community into a collection of frightened individuals, each just trying to survive another day. The simple act of laughing felt like a betrayal, a forbidden luxury, in a world that had forgotten joy. One night, they took my brother. It was late. We heard the heavy boots on the stairs, the harsh bang on the door. There was no time to ask why, no time to say goodbye. They were just there. And then he was gone. No explanation, no goodbye. My mother waited for him every day, until she no longer could. She would sit by the window, her gaze fixed on the empty street, as if her will alone could bring him back. She would set a place for him at the dinner table, even when there was barely enough food for the rest of us. Each day, a little bit of the light in her eyes went out. Hope is a fragile thing, and under the weight of such sorrow, it eventually breaks. The empty chair at our table became a monument to our loss, a silent testament to the cruelty that had invaded our lives. There was no funeral, no grave to visit, just an absence. A hole in our family that could never be filled. The silence he left behind was louder than any bomb. Survival was not bravery. It was instinct. It was the primal, desperate need to see the next sunrise. We shared crumbs of bread that felt like a feast. We learned to make soup from potato peels. We gave shelter to strangers in our cellars, knowing that if we were caught, it would mean death for all of us. And sometimes, we survived by pure luck. You would be walking down a street one moment, and the next the building you were about to pass is turned into a pile of smoking rubble. Why you? Why not them? There was no answer. It was just chance. We became like animals, living moment to moment, guided by the instinct to stay alive. Kindness became a revolutionary act. Sharing a piece of your meager ration with someone who had even less was a flicker of humanity in the darkness. Those small acts, those moments of shared humanity, were what kept us from losing ourselves completely. They were tiny embers of hope in a world consumed by fire. When the war ended, the world celebrated. We saw the footage later, the parades, the dancing in the streets of London, Paris, New York. But for the survivors, for those of us who had lived through it, peace came with ghosts. We walked through the ruins of our cities, looking for faces we knew we would never find again. The joy of liberation was mixed with the profound sorrow of what had been lost. I was alive, but not the same person. How could I be? The boy who loved books and worried about his future was buried under years of fear and loss. The war ended on paper, in treaties, signed by men in elegant rooms, but inside millions like me, it never truly did. The nightmares continued. The sudden noises still made me jump. The faces of the lost were etched into my memory. Peace was not a celebration. There was a quiet, heavy emptiness. It was the beginning of a long journey of trying to learn how to live again in a world that felt alien and broken. I tell this story not for pity. Pity is useless. I tell it so you will remember, so that you will understand that war is not about flags and anthems and glory. It's about empty chairs and hungry children and the smell of fear. It's about what is lost when we forget our shared humanity. Because wars begin when people forget what war really is. They begin with words of hatred, with the dehumanization of others, with the belief that violence can solve problems. They start quietly, in the hearts and minds of people, long before the first shot is fired. This was one voice out of millions. There are countless stories like mine, buried in the rubble of history, unheard. And as long as these voices are heard, as long as we choose to listen to the whispers of the past, history still has a chance to be remembered, and perhaps not repeated. Thank you for listening.